Welcome to Economics Unbound. I'm Tandega Gobulembegi. Welcome. Well, as we've seen yesterday, South Africans waited with bated breath for much anticipated budget speech for 2021. It was delivered, of course, by the South African Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni. The minister told members of parliament that there were improvements in the fiscal outlook, but said that this was not a time for complacency. Well, many taxpayers can now breathe a sigh of relief as the finance minister tabled a 2021 budget speech with no substantial tax hikes aimed at bankrolling South Africa's COVID-19 vaccination program.
Good evening, Tans and dear viewer. The budget speech comes at the tail end of South Africa's second wave of COVID-19 infections and the economic ructions from a year of national lockdowns aimed at curbing the pandemic. It also comes as the government prepares for the biggest vaccination program in South Africa's history. Just to add more on that, Tans, according to the budget review, debt service costs were higher than the 2020 budget estimates by 3.6 billion in the 2020-2021 financial. The budget review expects debt service costs to continue their increases at an annual average rate of 13.3%, reaching 338.6 billion in the 2023-2024 financial. The minister said in strong terms that South Africa will have to come to grips with its debts in the coming years. Mboweni urged that while there was discernible improvement in the fiscal outlook, it would be a fatal mistake for the government to allow complacency to set in.
Gee, Nana, it is good to see you. I sure did miss you while I was in Cape Town. The minister also said that South Africa's borrowing requirements will remain well above 500 billion in each year of the medium term, despite the modest improvements in our fiscal position. The review said gross national debt was projected to grow continuously over the long term, despite 2020 budget proposals to reduce expenditure growth. The review said strategies to contain debt would be monitored regularly by the Minister of Finance.
At this time of the year, there is great speculation around what the national budget looks like. It was expected that Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will reiterate his wake-up call that South Africa continues to live beyond its means. That is, that the country spends more than it earns and that the country continues to ratchet out debt at a Formula One-like pace. The budget deficit for fiscal year 2020 to 2021 was expected to be in excess of 14%. That's according to the National Treasury at the midterm budget in October last year, although there could be an improved number as there's a suggestion that the taxman has managed to collect more tax than previously expected. So is South Africa facing sovereign debt crisis? Well, just to explain further, a sovereign debt crisis occurs when a country is unable to pay its bills, but that doesn't happen overnight. There are plenty of warning signs. It usually becomes a crisis when the country's leaders ignore these indicators for political reasons. The first sign appears when the country cannot get a low interest rate from lenders. Amid concerns the country will go into debt default, investors become concerned that the country cannot afford to pay the bonds. The budget review said total consolidated spending is expected to amount to 6.16 trillion rand over the next 3 years, or 2 trillion rand each year over the medium term, with the majority of the spending going towards social services. The budget review and government borrows most of the financing which it needs by issuing bonds sold to foreign investors, banks, insurers and pension funds. It said domestic banks in turn have increased share of government bond holdings from 16.8% in January 2020 to 22% in December 2020. The debt service costs were higher than 2020 budget estimates by 3.6 billion in 2020-2021 financial year, as 11.3 billion rand in the 2021-2022 financial year and 17.9 billion in the 2020-2022-2023 financial year. The gross national debt was projected to grow continuously over the long term, despite the 2020 budget proposals to reduce expenditure growth. The review said strategies to contain debt would be monitored regularly by the minister. The budget review outlined two possible scenarios for South Africa's outlook where it relates to debt in the financial year. So one scenario outlines a rapid increase in electricity supply and faster reform implementation boosting growth, complemented by essential economic reforms. The second scenario reflects the effects of two more waves of COVID-19 infections, assuming the vaccine rollout has a limited effect on stemming the spread of infections, requiring strict lockdown measures that depress economic activity. The budget review said in this scenario, economic growth by only 1.6% in 2021 with a base effect in 2022, and production level will remain lower than currently forecast over the long run.
South Africa estimates that it will see its debt peak at 95% of GDP by 2025-26, and indeed this year has anticipated that it could see its debt levels above 80% of GDP. These are very high and sustainable debt levels for an emerging market economy, particularly one which has incredibly weak economic growth that does not support the servicing of such high debt levels. Indeed, South Africa has continued to see its debt trajectory grow, and as a consequence, this has weakened the government finance position.
The perilous fiscal situation against the backdrop of a very weak economy, unfortunately, means that the chances of further downgrades are quite high. But we are quite hopeful that the economic recovery during 2021 and 2022 and government's commitment to stabilizing its fiscal position will reduce the chances of further downgrades, and actually the rating agencies will take that into account and give the government some benefit of doubt, i.e., some room to stabilize government finances and get the economy going again.
I don't think they're going to touch corporate tax. Where they will probably go is the normal suspects, the other taxes that you have on what people call sin taxes and stuff like that. I don't think VAT, I think VAT is a challenge. I don't think the tax base can withstand another, and this is personal income tax, another tax hike. And definitely corporate tax, you don't encourage growth from the corporate sector by increasing the corporate tax rate, which is already high compared to international levels.
It seems that the economy will only achieve in 4 or 5 years' time the growth levels we had at the period before difficulty from 2015. Moreover, we will only see the size of the economy back at the end of 2019 level in about 5 years' time. For the government to get us out of this low growth trap, we really need a private sector friendly government with confidence in the private sector and more room for the private sector to operate. For instance, allowing the private sector to import COVID-19 vaccines.
Better than expected tax revenue collection since October has increased government's cash balances and will be used to cut borrowing. Treasury says this will be a drop in the ocean and has also announced budget cuts for social development, health and SA's Defence Force, which will get 4% less over the next 3 years. But its big budget priority is still the public sector wage bill, which represents more than a third of government spending and came to 637 billion over the past year. It has budgeted an increase of only 2.1% this year in civil servant remuneration and 1.2% per year over the following 2 years.
Now, government wants to vaccinate 67% of the population in a year. and Treasury has allocated an initial amount of 9 billion for the vaccines, which can increase to closer to 20 billion. However, some of the money will flow back as medical schemes will buy vaccines from the state. Treasury has allocated 100 million to the South African Medical Research Council for vaccine research.
In the economic development budget allocation, spending on roads is growing the fastest, increasing at an average annual rate of more than 8% to reach 110 billion in the next 3 years. And unlike the health and social development budgets, which saw budget cuts, spending on education and culture, which currently represents almost a quarter of government budget, will grow by 2.4% this year. Arts and culture will see an 8% increase in spending, largely due to a 34 billion allocation to support community libraries, school sport, and to drive transformation in sport.
Now, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has tabled a massive 2 trillion rand, 2.2 trillion in fact, rand budget for this year. But it's 300 billion rand less than last year's budget, which was tabled before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the tightening of the belt has been justified by the minister as due to government's need to reduce spending and stabilize public finances. This while seeking to put the economy on a recovery path following the devastation of the coronavirus pandemic.
A challenging task at hand. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni says the effects of COVID-19 have been far-reaching and will likely be long-lasting. Economic output and employment are expected to return to pre-pandemic levels only in 2 years' time. Performance of various sectors is undermined by unreliable electricity supply and weak public investment. Government's plan to turn around the economy include reducing the cost of doing business to encourage private sector investments to promote economic growth and job creation. Mboweni says the composition of spending will shift from consumption to capital investment.
Government is committed to a 791.2 billion rand in infrastructure investment. We are already partnering with the private sector and other players to roll out infrastructure through initiatives such as the blended finance system.
Government expects the economy to grow at 3.3% this year from a contraction of 7.2% last year. With confidence and investments in the economy at low levels, government says it plans to make things better by removing structural constraints that obstruct growth. The finance minister says in the short term, structural reforms to promote economic recovery will focus on speeding up expansion of electricity generation, creating jobs, rolling out infrastructure, and supporting manufacturing and beneficiation. Risks to growth include new waves of infections and the associated disruptions to economic activity.
This whole budget turns on the fact that there are practically no provision for salary increases for civil servants beyond annual notch increases. And if that part of the budget does not work out, this whole budget plan will fall apart.
The finance minister says there's a threat of a debt spiral if urgent steps are not taken to stabilize government finances. Government debt now stands at 80% of GDP and it's expected to increase to 82% of GDP in the next financial year. Government guaranteed debts of state-owned companies are also expected to grow. Interest paid on debt also remains a concern, but economists say Mboweni could have managed to avert further credit ratings downgrades for now.
Today's budget is certainly a positive budget from the point of view that I believe it's unlikely to see credit rating downgrades happen imminently and certainly not in the first half of this year. However, the budget, while it does show a lowering in the debt projections and certainly a significant improvement from the 93% peaking to one of a peaking of close to 90% in the 2025 period, obviously is still very high. And from a debt sustainability perspective, for emerging markets, middle-income economies, debt around 60% is certainly seen as more sustainable.
It's hoped the mass COVID-19 vaccine rollout will help boost economic recovery. Government has allocated 9 billion rand to fund the ongoing COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Another 9 billion rand more will be drawn from the contingency reserve should the need arise. Gloria Sefako Mosi, SABC News, Parliament.
Meanwhile, police have fired stun grenades to disperse members of the Labour Federation SAFTU in Cape Town. Police also dispersed a group near Parliament protesting under the banner of the Right to Know campaign. Now, SAFTU staged pickets outside Parliament and across the country over unemployment, poverty, as well as inequality. Yesterday, Statistics South Africa released the country's unemployment figures. That's the day before. And those were the figures for the last quarter. They show that 7 million people are officially without jobs, and there's more than 60% unemployment among the youth. All roads around the parliamentary precinct were cordoned off under the Disaster Management Act.
COSATU has accused the government of wanting to impose a 4-year wage bill and says this is going to demoralize employees. It says that the speech does not address the high levels of corruption or even ways to help stimulate the economy. The Labour Federation says is relying mostly on the Economic Recovery Plan, which is before NEDLEC, to help enhance local procurement and create the much-needed jobs.
You have to address the fundamentals, which is corruption, which is wasteful expenditure, which is collapsing SOEs and municipalities, but also a stagnant economy. You need to stimulate the economy to grow so that companies can remain open, they can pay their taxes, so workers can remain employed and pay their taxes. What government is doing is simply saying we're going to cut expenditure, we're going to pose a freeze, and somehow pray for miracles that the economy will pick up on its own, that jobs will be saved on their own. And for us, that is going to worsen the situation.
Business has welcomed the reduction of the corporate tax rate and says this will help encourage growth and investment. But it has raised concerns on whether government departments will utilize the funds allocated properly without engaging in corruption.
We welcome the corporate tax decrease. We think that that will help encourage some growth and some investment, both local and global. And we think that is useful. I think the aggressive path toward getting us into a surplus situation by 24-25 needs to be welcomed. But again, the budget can only do so much. It's essentially telling us how much money we're going to raise and how we're going to allocate those monies. The important part is for the departments to actually implement and deliver.
Business says only time will tell on whether the envisaged economic growth of 3.3% for this year and the debt stabilization efforts will be realized. Naledi Matlapeng, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, thank you, Naledi. Dear viewer, please stay with us. We'll be back after the short break. Welcome back. There were no holy cows as Finance Minister Tito Mboweni took the axe to government spending, especially social spending programs, even as he protested vehemently that this was not an austerity budget. Spending on the police, defense, and even social grants has been cut, and a total of 30,000 public sector jobs have been earmarked for shedding as the government moves to reduce the wage bill.
As usual, education gets the lion's share of the budget. Its allocation goes up by 16 billion rand to 403 billion this year. The bulk of this amount will go to the Department of Basic Education to improve school infrastructure. The Department of Social Development gets the second biggest slice of the cake with 335 billion rand this year. But the amount is a massive 78 billion rand less compared to last year. Money has been earmarked to extend the popular 350 rand social relief of distress grant until the end of April. But spending on social grants is set to decrease by 6 billion rand this year, despite the number of beneficiaries expected to grow by 300,000. The old age and disability grants will increase by just 30 rand to 1,890 rand a month from April. The child support grant will go up by 15 rand to 460 rand a month, and the foster care grant will increase by 10 rand to 1,050 rand a month.
Provinces will receive 3.5 billion from the Department of Social Development to improve access to early childhood development services. 6.3 billion is allocated to extend the special COVID Social Relief of Distress grant until the end of April 2021. Mr. President, we're responding to your injunction. In addition, 678.3 million is earmarked for Provincial Department of Social Development and Basic Education to continue rolling out free sanitary towels for learners from low-income households.
Health gets the third biggest share of the budget. Its allocation increases by 3 billion rand to 249 billion.
The provincial equitable share will be augmented by 8 billion rand for provincial health departments in 2021-22 to deal with COVID-19.
The police budget has been cut by 2 billion rand to 104.5 billion rand this year. The Department of Defense sees its budget reduced by 7.5 billion rand. The Department of Home Affairs' budget goes down by 1 billion rand, and the Department of Justice and Correctional Services budget remains unchanged at 48.5 billion rand. Despite the wide-ranging spending cuts, Finance Minister Mboweni went out of his way to stress that this was not an austerity budget. Kosatu was quick to disagree.
We wouldn't agree because he's imposed a 4-year wage freeze on public servants. That's in effect, when you take into account inflation, a 15% salary cut. And for example, on SABC, in the budget, it commits government to retrenching 300 workers at SABC. We've seen thousands of workers losing their jobs at SAA, SA Express, and other parastatals. We've seen in municipalities workers not receiving their salary. What you see in the main thing in the budget is that there's an effect, an expenditure freeze for the next 3 years on different departments, and that's basically on the back of public servants' wages. So for us, that is an austerity budget. It may not be as brutal, for example, as you saw in Greece, but nonetheless, they're dumping the bill for corruption, for wasteful expenditure, for state capture upon public servants through a wage freeze.
Thank you very much.
The debate over this year's budget is surely going to continue for some time to come. Bongeni Muchwa, SABC News, Parliament.
Now, Finance Minister Mboweni did not announce any major new tax proposals when he delivered the budget speech in Cape Town. The move is expected to support economic growth after the country's already ailing economy was battered by the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Taxpayers were anticipating a 40 billion rand tax hike over the medium term, but this has since been withdrawn. The minister did, however, introduce above-inflation increases in personal income tax brackets and an overall 8% increase in sin taxes.
Households can expect some relief as National Treasury moves to support households and companies following business closures, salary cuts, and record-high job losses. Some taxpayers will pay 5% less taxes come April thanks to the revision of personal income tax brackets. Come next month, the annual tax-free threshold in South Africa increases to 87,000 rand and to over 135,000 rand for senior citizens. Sin taxes on malt beer increased by 14 cents, 44 cents for wine, and 1 rand 39 cents for a pack of cigarettes. The general fuel levy goes up to 3 rand 85 cents for a litre of petrol and 3 rand 70 for diesel, and the road accident fund levy also goes up to 2 rand 18 cents per litre from April.
I requested tips from the public to help in crafting this budget. Many tips spoke about the limits to increased taxation. Others spoke about the need to cut the number of cabinet ministers, and I told them that was above my pay cut. It's above my pay level. That's not mine. We agree that tax increases must be kept to a minimum. And therefore, General Approval, there's no need for a tax revolt.
Tax revenue collection was under pressure following the hard lockdown, but made a significant recovery in December due to higher commodity prices. As a result, Treasury has withdrawn tax increases amounting to 40 billion rand announced in the medium-term budget policy statement. The increases were set to be introduced over the next 4 years to stabilize public debt and public finances.
The reduction in the corporate income tax rate is one that is really welcomed. It's one that I've personally have been asking for a number of years. What we're looking to achieve here is to encourage increased foreign direct investment into South Africa. Now, with us on the southern tip of Africa, in order to encourage foreign businesses to come and set up shop here, we need to give them some incentives.
Tax collection targets have been revised down by around 213 billion rand compared to last year. This on the back of a low economic growth environment compounded by COVID-19. Government was contemplating increasing taxes to fund the vaccine program, but better than expected revenue growth has provided room to maneuver. The improvement in revenue has helped narrow the budget deficit from the projected 14% of GDP last year to 9.3% this year.
In October, the minister said we will be short by about 313 billion because we believe the contraction would be higher. We have seen in quarter 3 a slight uptick, a more encouraging recovery, not complete yet, and the compliance efforts by SARS have also increased the additional revenue from compliance activities, and collectively the economic recovery plus our compliance activity has given us the 100 billion.
Government debt as a ratio to GDP is projected to stabilize at 88.9% in the next 5 years. Balentle Mthethwa, SABC News, Parliament.
The South African Revenue Services says it's satisfied with the outcome of the 2021 budget speech delivered yesterday. Beyond financing for COVID, it is possible that for some, the best words from the minister were the words, "We agree that tax increases must be kept to a minimum as we stabilize." Government's call to not increase taxes is due to a collection that was higher than expected from the previous financial year. SABC News spoke to SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter earlier on.
What we have seen, if I take you back a year ago, when the minister issued the initial estimate, we had penciled in economic growth of 5.1%. Where we stand at the moment is just over 7%, which means there's been a 12% swing in the economic growth. Understandably, that's where the October estimate of an undercollection of just over 313 billion came from. Well, what happened, in fact, because tax is a reflection of what actually happens in the economy and not the assumptions. So 2 things that actually happened. The first is we had seen a better than expected recovery, specifically in some of the sectors that have dollar-based income like platinum and gold mining, and there's been a good rally on prices and sales volumes has gone up. So that has had a positive impact. And secondly, SARS has really focused hard on improving its compliance activities in order to address levels of low compliance, and that has also yielded additional revenue. So all in all, it's a positive trend, but we still have a long way to go, so it's no time to declare early victories.
And speaking of Mr. Kieswetter, Minister Mboweni, in that budget speech yesterday announcing that tax increases must be kept to a minimum as the country tries to stabilize economically. But how does this actually affect the revenue service, and what sort of knock-on effects can we expect from this?
Well, there are three factors that drive the actual revenue performance. The first is the well-being of the economy, on which we impose tax policy instruments. If the economy does well, you have a more healthy and more buoyant revenue performance. If the economy underperforms, as we have seen in the past year due to COVID, but remember we were already on a struggling economic trajectory before that, then you find a revenue performance being constrained. But there are two other factors that are very essential and often not understood well. The first is the capability and capacity of SARS to administer its laws. That requires the right people of the right competency in the right place, and it requires us increasingly to expand and increase the use of data. We can't work with data without data, and then on that data, using machine learning algorithms and other tools to extract and predict the right insights from that data. And thirdly, just streamline digital platforms for ease of use by all stakeholders, including taxpayers. And then the third factor is levels of compliance and tax modality. And that, understandably, is the social contract between its citizens and the government. And where that contract is broken, or at least is impaired, and ours, we have to be honest and say ours has been fractured by high levels of corruption and inefficient spending and a lag in the delivery of promises that have been made. And so some people feel morally justified to pay their taxes. And so it's those three things that work in concert. And SARS, it's constantly looking at all three to as we rebuild the platform and the capability of SARS, we seek to maximize all three of those driving forces.
And just sticking with that for a moment, we have seen in recent weeks the topic around a threat of a tax revolt surfacing again. Is this something that concerns you as the SARS Commissioner at this point?
Of course it concerns me that the very same people who get on their soapboxes and high horses and preach lawfulness would at the same time encourage lawlessness on the other hand. You don't build a lawful society by breaking laws because you feel morally justified to do so. And ultimately, it's not the government we are hurting. We are hurting the ordinary people, the men and the old people who wait every month for that social old age pension, the young mothers, the infirm and disabled, the nurses that we employ, the teachers that we employ, the frontline workers who have fought so valiantly. Those are the people we really hurt. And so it is irresponsible to advance a narrative of a tax revolt. Thankfully, that is not the bulk of South Africans. Most South Africans are decent people. They want to obey and honor the law, and we want to make it easy for them to fulfill those obligations. And we encourage them that their tax really matters, because it is ultimately about the quality of life of ordinary South Africans. You also have heard us announce a greater focus on individuals with wealth and complex financial arrangements. You know, the sad reality is that it is always corporates and wealthy individuals who have the means to arrange their affairs in a way that sometimes skirt the law. And then we have had a proliferation of criminal activities, nothing short of hardcore criminal activities. And so those are the areas that we will focus on increasingly, so that you and I, who pay our fair share, can sleep knowing that those who seek to break the law and to defraud the system will not be left without consequence.
The budget was well received by some and criticized bitterly by many. But it's a bitter pill to swallow for tipplers who love to drink. Reporter Griselda Lewis visited a Johannesburg pub where patrons bemoaned the sin tax hikes.
A 340 milliliter can of beer or cider will cost an extra 14 cents. B, A 750 milliliter bottle of wine will cost an extra 26 cents with immediate effect. C, a 750 milliliter bottle of sparkling wine, an extra 86 cents. Next, a bottle of 750 milliliter spirits, including whiskey, gin or vodka, will increase by R5.50.
So it's not good news for those who enjoy a pint or a shot. The old saying, take it or leave it, has never been truer. It's going to cost you a whole lot more, and most tipplers are not impressed. So the minister believes consumers do react to price increases, and more expensive liquor should lead to lower consumption levels with positive spin-offs. But what do the patrons here say?
Well, look, the increase, well, as the finance minister said, we owe people money, a lot of people money. So we've got to generate the revenue. And sin tax is an obvious target. When you consider the lockdown situation, the black market for the cigarettes and the booze and everything, people could afford it. So, fair enough, we've got to stretch a little bit. I don't drink vodka, so I'm okay. I drink beer, so you know the extra R50 or R15 really won't make very much difference to me. Always with my beer, and as you see, all the sin taxes are hitting me. I'm a smoker as well, so.
Well, unfortunately, it hurts. It hurts, but I can't say it wasn't really expected. I mean, with everything that was happening, I have to say it really was kind of expected. But it still hurts nonetheless.
I won't change my drink at all. I may just drink less at a pub, which could affect their income, if that makes sense. So I don't think it's really going to mean much difference to me. But I think on the lower income group, it's really going to affect him.
There's no extra money but I will still carry on because it's what I do. And this is my local pub, so it does affect me.
Establishments which are closed during the harder lockdown say there is simply no money to stock up at heavier prices, but they have no choice.
Generally, with the new budget, I think you're going to find that as prices go up, people are going to come to the bar maybe less, especially on the things like vodka and that, where it's gone up by a huge amount of money. It's not just a couple of cents. Imagine that what the government put it up, we have to put it up roughly 3 times that amount to cover our costs. So that's where the problem comes in. In the pub itself, we noticed that due to the hard times with the lockdown, this bar used to do 20%, 22% of our turnover, and this bar now does only 12% of the turnover that we used to do. So that's a massive drop. Now with the new price increases, you're going to see probably more of a drop. People are going to come out less, they're going to tend to drink more at home. That's going to be the issue, I think, really.
We feel that the excise duty increase is really a slap in the face for the industry, especially if you look at the tough trading period we've been subjected to due to the restricted trade. It is more like the government is trying to milk a cow that is earmarked for slaughtering. A lot of liquor traders will feel constrained, as a result of the reduced revenue base. So surely some of them will then have to face closure.
But will pricier booze see a drop in sales? Well, the jury is still out on that one. Griselda Lewis, SABC News in Johannesburg.
Welcome back. Well, Nana, it seems that no matter how much pressure the finance minister piles on the booze, some guys will just go bottoms up. Now, Minister Mboweni has again blasted critics who accuse him of having passed another austerity budget in disregard of the plight of the poor and the working class. At least 19 civil society movements supported by trade union federations penned a scathing letter saying the data in the budget review makes it clear that the Treasury's austerity project has been intensified and the minister is doubling down on austerity.
Briefing Parliament's joint committees on finance, Mboweni used the opportunity to hit back at these movements. He was again emphatic that their accusations were not supported by empirical evidence.
People talk austerity, austerity. I don't know what they're talking about. If, for example, 56% of your budget is social services. But anyway, it's in the nature of politics. People have to be seen to be saying something smart and clever, I suppose.
The civil society groups argued that the budget allocation to social grants and other social services were either ignored or increases were below inflation. This argument was strongly supported by opposition parties.
The poor in South Africa are getting poorer as a result of below inflation increases and the 27 cents per litre increase in the fuel price, which disproportionately affects the poor rather than the middle class in society.
Fiscal consolidation and austerity have never been a mechanism to stabilize that anywhere in the world. There is no scientific illustration anywhere in the world that says that fiscal consolidation can make you meet your debt obligations in the manner that it is.
Others expressed appreciation for the Treasury's effort to stabilize debt. But civil society movements insist the Treasury should have accounted for inflation when allocating funds to social services. Inflation is forecasted at 4.2% and 4.4% per year over the next 3 years. They also blamed the Treasury for having been mum on the filling of 40,000 vacancies in the public health sector. Manelisi Tubase, SABC News, Parliament.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has allocated 10 billion rand over the next 2 years to the vaccination program. This as the country starts to vaccinate healthcare workers. Mboweni says government agrees with the public that tax increases must be kept to a minimum. He's announced that the 40 billion rand tax measures proposed in October last year during the midterm budget policy statement will not be implemented.
We are allocating more than 10 billion rand for the purchase and delivery of vaccines over the next 2 years. But we do not stop there. We are increasing the contingency reserve from 5 billion to 12 billion to make provision for any further purchases of vaccines and to cater for any other emergencies. With this framework, we are on track to achieve our goal of closing the main budget primary deficits. We shall achieve a primary surplus on the main budget in 2024-25. This will be an important achievement and will coincide with the end of this 6th Parliament.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has announced an increase of social grants from old age, disability and care dependency grants.
Now, the regular social assistance grants are adjusted upwards. The old age, disability, care dependency grants are increased to 1,890 rand. The increase for war veterans grant to 1,910 rand. An increase in child support grant goes up to 460 rand. An increase for foster care grant increases to 1,050 rand.
Well, before we say goodnight, let us let you know that it has been an honor and a privilege to bring you this budget review and bringing you a diversity of views from a number of different perspectives. This panoramic view of the budget speech was brought to you by the economics team of the SABC. Next week, we discuss Operation Vulindlela, about which the Minister of Finance has spoken much about. It is a project driven by the Presidency and National Treasury aimed at restructuring, transforming and reforming the South African economy. Good night for now. Till then, Khonandin Mawit.